Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to your House of Commons and your Canadian Parliament. My questions will focus on Madame Volk. Ms. Volk, your corporation is responsible for ensuring as much housing as possible for as many Canadians as possible and to govern responsibly. Can you tell me whether you paid bonuses to your employees and your officers this year? Thank you for the question. I'll answer in English, and I hope that that's fine with you.
We have a system of pay that is, you asked the question around bonuses. I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question. We have a system of pay that is known as pay at risk. So we establish a compensation level for our employees, and we don't give it to them all at once. We give them a base salary, and we reserve part of it, which they get only upon completion of their objectives. So while the media likes to call that a bonus, to us it's actually part of our compensation philosophy. It's pay at risk.
Est-ce qu'il est vrai que 99% des dirigeants...
It is true that 99% of CMHC employees received bonuses last year. Perhaps I don't have the figures, but 99%, that's not exactly a minority. That's almost everybody who received a bonus. But a bonus is not salary. A bonus is when you achieve goals which were really difficult to achieve. But if 99% of officers have achieved these goals, perhaps the objectives were not properly set. How is it possible that 99% of your officers were able to receive a bonus?
It is not a bonus. It is part of their compensation that is put at risk at the beginning of the year. And if they don't achieve their specific objectives, they're not entitled to the full payment of that amount. I think the fact that most of our employees do attain their objectives is something that I would be proud of.
Pouvez-vous nous donner un exemple précis d'un de vos...
Could you give me a specific example of one of your officers who really met the objectives that Canadian citizens wish for? In other words, that their officers accomplish things. Access to property. That's your objective, is it not? Can you give me a specific example of one of your officers, because 99% of them received a bonus? So what was their objective achieved so that Canadians' access to housing is fantastic, whereas the situation is in fact the opposite?
Risk is relative, their objectives are established on the basis of what they can individually contribute to the corporation. So every individual will have a different set of objectives, and it will relate to their role in the organization and how they can help the organization achieve its success.
$30.6 million.
$30.6 million in bonuses have been paid to your officers and employees. Do you find that's to be expected to have so much bonuses when we have the worst situation in housing since the World War II?
Side as pay at risk, to pay only if they achieve their objectives.
La Banque Royale du Canada a dit que c'est...
The Royal Bank of Canada said that we are currently experiencing the most difficult times in accessing property. Your objective as an organization is to ensure that Canadians can access ownership of property. Banks have confirmed that this is the worst situation since World War II. How can you provide bonuses to your people when we're going through the worst crisis now and it's not changing despite your actions?
Crisis in Canada, and there are many partners who are required to help resolve that housing crisis. Unfortunately, CMHC does not have the tools to solve that on our own. We have many partners. We have the federal government. We have the provincial governments, the municipalities. Many nonprofits are involved. It is not a situation that CMHC has the resources or the mandate to solve on its own.
Votre mandat n'est-il pas d'avoir...
But isn't your mandate to make everybody able to access home ownership?
Our mandate is much broader than that. Our mandate is to help the system function appropriately and efficiently.
Force est d'admettre que le système ne fonctionne pas, madame, parce qu'on vit...
But very clearly, the system is not working because we're experiencing a terrible crisis, the worst since the Second World War. 70% of people who do not have access to home ownership have given up their dream of owning a home. That's your responsibility to help them. How can you pay bonuses to 99% of your officers when 70% of people who don't have access to housing ownership have decided to give up on that dream? What are we supposed to tell those people who've given up on their dream when you're paying 99% of your employees a bonus for $30 million?
I agree with you completely that there is a housing crisis and that it's very sad what is happening in the country and that people can't afford the homes that they need. I don't agree that it is CMHC's responsibility to solve that on our own because we don't have the resources or the mandate to solve that on our own. We have a mandate to deliver programs on behalf of the government, which we do, and we meet our service standards and we fulfill our objectives and our mandate as defined by the Government of Canada.
Les gens qui nous écoutent, quand ils paient des taxes et impôts, ça...
Our listeners who are paying taxes expect Crown corporations to serve them. In this case, we are seeing that the people who are being served by the taxes are the senior officials.
Moving forward. Now I'd like to go back on my colleague here touched upon these bonuses, and we're in this committee we're here to represent the taxpayer. That's what we're here to do. So I want to touch on this. You had mentioned that it's about $30 million in bonuses, but you had said that it's not necessarily a bonus. But can you elaborate on that? Because what I'm seeing here in my notes is there's no real guidelines, or the workers are working at their own pace. Can you give me clarity on that?
Thanks for the question. Every individual has their own performance management agreement in which they, with their supervisor, establish their objectives for the year. Some of those objectives would be fairly common things, good fiscal administration, good, those kinds of things. But then they have very specific targets based on what they are bringing to the organization. So it's different for someone in an IT function versus someone in an HR function versus someone on the front lines versus someone in our insurance function. Everybody has their own. So they with their supervisor are establishing their own objectives. If they don't meet their objectives, they are not entitled to that pay at risk. As I say, we don't call it, it's pay at risk.
So we know that 99% of your organization met their standard. I still don't see clarity on that. I can appreciate that everybody has their own goals set out I guess, at the time of signing the contract. I don't think that's in my opinion, a good explanation to the taxpayer. I think that has to be a little bit more clear cut, because even if you work at a car lot, you understand where you're going to get above your base pay. You're clearly not a car lot. You're a massive organization. There's no real clarity. So out of all the employees you have, each individual has their own incentive. I just don't think that explanation is a good explanation for the taxpayer, in my opinion. It's not very clear. My recommendation would be to have a lot of clarity in there, because as it reads, it's $30 million in bonuses to 99% of your workers. And at a time of a housing crisis, we have to justify that to the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. I'll allow a response, please.
Thank you. I agree that it could be interpreted that way, but it's not the reality to me. I would say we don't. First of all, as I mentioned, CMHC isn't responsible in and of itself, is not capable of solving the housing crisis, so that can't be the overall measure. But also, very importantly, every person in CMHC has a different way of contributing. I use the example of someone in IT. They're going to do an excellent job of their IT systems. Whether or not people are, whatever the situation is on the ground in a housing context. So everyone brings their own individual piece to the organization, and that is what is recognized through the performance pay.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Ms. Volk. Ms. Volk, I'll go back to Mr. Deltel's questions originally, where he kept calling the pay that members of your department were receiving at CMHC as bonuses. I understand that bonuses are exceptional payments where work exceeds expectations, and you were trying to explain, I believe, that this was at-risk pay, which is a regular component of pay, not an exceptional component of pay, and that it is given not when work exceeds expectations, but when work meets expectations. Can you sort of explain that so that people don't believe that 99% of your department received bonuses for exceptional performance?
Thank you for the question. Yes. So the way this works, when we engage an employee, there is a job to be done. That job is classified. We determine the salary that is appropriate, the level of compensation that's appropriate for that position. We give a percentage of that salary as base pay. So they get to collect that every 2 weeks as part of their base pay. But we reserve part of it. We hold back part of it. And that is the component that at the end of the year we assess, did that individual meet the commitments that they made that year? So did their performance meet the expectations that we had of them? And if it did, they earn back the rest of the pay that was put at risk at the beginning of the year.
So just so that I can put this into number terms so that people at home can understand this, in many companies, for example, if you earn $80,000, you'll have an eligibility for a bonus. So you're still going to be paid your $80,000, but let's say you're eligible for 10% bonuses based on your personal objectives and departmental objectives. At the end of the year, people will assess if you met, the department met the objectives, you met your objectives, and you may potentially get another $8,000. So you would be paid $88,000 instead of $80,000. You got $80,000 for sure and $8,000 because of exceptional performance. What you're saying is you're paying somebody, your base pay is $80,000, but you're withholding $8,000 of it, for example. So you're withholding 10% and they're only paid $72,000 instead of their normal $80,000 base pay. And if they meet the objectives, not exceed objectives, but meet the objectives, then they'll get the additional $8,000 to bring their base salary to the total 100% of $80,000. Would that be a fair way to explain it?
That's a fair characterization of pay at risk. It is not that at the end of the year we determine that the company has had a tremendous year and we're going to throw a little bit extra at everyone. It's that we have determined how much we feel your job is worth. We've paid you part of it up front, and the rest of it you have to earn by meeting your objectives over the year. That's a very fair characterization.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So my next question is, well, it's more of a statement than a question, but as a simple guy from Hamilton, there hasn't been a lot of clarity here today, and that's the part that is very difficult for me, and I would imagine be very difficult for the taxpayer. So on one hand, we have the Auditor General who's clearly said that she would like more data, which I agree with 100%. We have to pin that down. Then we have the CMHC with, there's no real time data. There was no clear answer to the bonuses, but then the member from the government had to swoop in and kind of answer that question for you, which I find very concerning. Then there's a lot of goals that haven't been met across the board. So I'm a little bit at a loss for words, and I've also witnessed one organization pass the buck to the next organization and back and forth. This is very concerning. This is very concerning. We're in a housing crisis. We're not meeting our targets, and there's no real clarity. And the Auditor General just needs more data for more clarity. I don't think the folks at home, the taxpayer, would be very happy with what we've heard today. And I don't agree with this. Again, I have to go back to these bonuses. I don't agree. Well, now it's a withholding pay scheme. I'm just not clear on any of this. I would hope moving forward that we get a lot more clarity, the public gets a lot more clarity, because I'll be honest with you, when the taxpayer tunes into this, they're not going to be happy, because I wasn't a politician 4 months ago, and I'm not happy with what I'm hearing today. I would urge would urge, and I think it's safe to say that you have the best interest for the country. I'm not disputing that. But there's no wonder why we haven't been meeting any of the goals, and we're in a housing crisis. No offense.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Do you have a brief question, or I'll let them respond if you have a brief question?
They
go
can
ahead.
respond.
All right. I'll ask the two witnesses to respond, please.
Appreciate your question. I'm
Statement.
very apologetic statement. Very apologetic if you felt that we were passing the buck. That is certainly not the way that Paul and I work. I can provide some clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities. If the Auditor General concludes that a program has been administered poorly, that it has not, money is not going out fast enough, it's not, it is a problem of administration, I am definitely the one at the table who is accountable for that. If the Auditor General says in the future this program should have more, it should use a different definition of affordability, or there should be some design different in the program, that is something that Paul would address because he's responsible now for the designing of the programs, or for the advice to the government that designs the programs. But if it's about administration, that is absolutely me. So if we left any sense that we were passing the buck, I apologize for that. That's not our intention at all. It's very clear to us.
Thank you.